Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up in today's program, an Israeli airstrike kills 5 paramedics after striking a civil defense emergency center in southern Lebanon. Also in southern Lebanon, Israel says it has killed 2 Hezbollah commanders, Ahmed Mustafa al-Haj Ali and Mohammed Ali Hamdan. An Israeli airstrike kills at least 28 people and wounds dozens of others who were sheltering at a school in Deir al-Balah, which is in central Gaza. And the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu considers retaliation following on from last week's attack by Iran. In just a moment, I'll be speaking to the retired Israeli Major General and former National Security Advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu, Yaakov Amidror. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. We begin in Lebanon, where Israel's Air Force killed 5 paramedics after striking a civil defense emergency center in the southern village of Dergaya. Well, overnight, airstrikes also hit Wardaniya, which is a town in central Lebanon's Mount Lebanon Governorate, killing at least 5 people there. Well, 2 significant strikes were also reported in Beirut's southern suburbs. Well, the Israeli military says it has killed 2 Hezbollah commanders in southern Lebanon. One was Ahmed Mustafa al-Haj Ali, allegedly responsible for firing hundreds of rockets and anti-tank missiles at Kiryat Shimona. Well, Israel also says it has killed Mohammed Ali Hamdan, who's accused of launching missile attacks on northern Israel. Additionally, Israel claims to have bombed weapons warehouses in Beirut and military infrastructure in southern Lebanon, though Hezbollah has yet to respond. Well, this comes as the Israeli military says approximately 40 rockets were fired from Lebanon towards Upper Israel's Upper Galilee. Well, Israeli media reports say that some of the rockets were intercepted, but others hit a building in Margaliot. Well, explosions were also hit in Kiryat Shimona, where Hezbollah rockets also killed 2 Israelis on Wednesday. Welcome. We begin in Lebanon, where Israel's Air Force killed 5 paramedics after striking a civil defense emergency center in the southern village of Dergaya. Well, overnight airstrikes also hit Wardaniya, which is a town in Lebanon's central mountain district, killing at least 5 people there. Well, 2 significant strikes were also reported in Beirut's southern suburbs. Well, the Israeli military says it has killed 2 Hezbollah commanders in southern Lebanon. One of them, Ahmed Mustafa al-Haj Ali, is allegedly responsible for firing hundreds of rockets and anti-tank missiles at Kiryat Shimona. They also report having killed Mohammed Ali Hamdan, who's accused of launching missile attacks on northern Israel. Additionally, Israel claims to have bombed weapons warehouses in Beirut and military infrastructure in southern Lebanon, though Hezbollah has yet to respond to this. Well, this all comes as the Israeli military says approximately 40 rockets were fired from Lebanon towards northern Israel's Upper Galilee. Well, Israeli media reports say that some of the rockets were intercepted, but others hit a building in Margaliot. Well, explosions were also heard in Kiryat Shimona, where Hezbollah rockets killed 2 Israelis on Wednesday. Well, I'm joined now by the Managing Director of the Lebanese advocacy group Kullu Irada and a former Senior Economic Advisor to the United Nations, Diana Menhem. Thank you very much indeed for joining us now from Beirut. Just looking broadly at the situation, the situation on the ground in Lebanon at the moment. We're in a situation where more than 2,000 people have been killed. 1.2 million people have been forced to flee their homes. Just bring us up to speed on what's been happening during the last 24 hours on the ground.
I mean, what has happened in the past 24 hours is the same as what has been happening for the past few days. All eyes now are on South Lebanon. There's a huge fear among the Lebanese that what Israel had claimed to be a very limited ground operation in south of Lebanon is slowly turning into an invasion, into a huge ground operation. There is a real fear that this will continue for a very long time, unlike what was previously stated. And as these ground incursions continue, I mean, the Lebanese are living in total dystopia. I mean, it's a very dark reality of sleeping to the sound of bombs, hoping nothing will happen to the people you know and love, waiting for the daily death toll and wishing that it is low, and waiting desperately for the hostilities to end, which unfortunately, until the moment, the opposite seems to be true. The war is expanding, the death toll is increasing, and Lebanon, especially the towns in the south and in Dahieh, are slowly being reduced to rubble. Today, nearly 1 out of 5 Lebanese are internally displaced, many of them coming from areas that have been completely destroyed. The Lebanese are living in awful conditions. The displaced are living in horrible conditions. Some of them are sleeping on the streets, others at the beach. Those lucky enough to be staying in an apartment are sharing it sometimes with 20 to 25 family members. Some are even taking turns to sleep. I mean, this is deplorable and unsustainable.
And in terms of the overall humanitarian situation across the country, I mean, even before this latest disaster in Lebanon, the government was under enormous pressure, households were under enormous pressure. The middle class has been plunged in many cases into poverty. Are people managing to make ends meet? I mean, presumably if people were living paycheck to paycheck and now there aren't any paychecks, I mean, are people going to be able to afford to feed themselves and feed their families?
I mean, what you're referring to is absolutely true. In fact, Lebanon has been dependent for the past 5 years on aid and on remittances that come from the Lebanese diaspora that send money to their families. And this norm is continuing today. And what is absolutely correct is that Lebanon has been struggling with an economic crisis, with one of the worst economic crises of the past 150 years, actually, for the past 5 years now. And that the state, even before the war, was unable to provide basic services to its citizens. So the country has been suffering for quite a while now, and now this war has compounded all of the miseries of the Lebanese. The state is extremely fragile. Its response is far from being sufficient compared to the needs on the ground, and many of the Lebanese are relying on personal initiatives and on non-governmental organizations in order for them to meet their needs.
And I'm just wondering, in terms of morale and listening to the situation you've described for us there, I mean, do the Lebanese people feel like the world and their allies have turned their back on them? And do people feel abandoned by the international community there?
The Lebanese are absolutely left on their own. It's not only the international community that has left them, it's also their own state that has left them. I mean, for the past 5 years, and of course now more than ever, the Lebanese have really forgotten what it means to live normal lives, to have careers, to think about starting a business in the country. They have definitely, unfortunately, given up on the option of making a future for themselves and for their children here. They are left totally on their own to their fate. The Lebanese state is incapable of defending their national interests. The international community has, for the past year, made promises that it has been unable to hold with regards to actually stopping Israeli aggression, be it in Gaza or in Lebanon. And we found ourselves today in a situation where we're actually stuck between a never-ending cycle of Israeli aggression and, of course, Iran's regional interest, and Iran trying to push its regional interest at the expense of the Lebanese.
Indeed. And do you think, just referring to some of the points you've made there, that if Lebanon had a proper functioning government, that none of this would have happened, that things would have taken a very different turn?
I'll take to the year 2006 as an example. I don't think that none of this would have happened, but I definitely think that had Lebanon had a capable government today that is able to draw a clear line between Hezbollah's calculations and between the national interest of Lebanon and of the Lebanese, then yes, the situation would have probably been different. We have lived this in 2006, where a government was able very clearly to push for Lebanon's interest, to get Hezbollah on the table and to get Hezbollah and the Israelis to agree to an agreement that actually upheld Lebanon's national interest. This is very far from today's reality. I mean, and you can see very clearly that the government is helpless. We can see an outrageous statement, I mean, that completely undermined Lebanese sovereignty. The Iranian prime minister has indicated very clearly a few days ago that it was Lebanon's duty to defend Gaza, signaling his clear refusal to de-link both fronts and implying that the war in Lebanon had to go on. We can also see that the Israeli prime minister honestly informed the Lebanese in a statement that more destruction and death are coming to Lebanon. And in the midst of it all, the Lebanese state is absent, is extremely absent. There was a very shy attempt a few days before the visit of the Iranian foreign minister, to push for, to call for a ceasefire, to push for the implementation of 1701, but this was clearly deflected after the visit of the Iranian foreign minister.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to ask you about the message that was put out, I think, on Tuesday by Prime Minister Netanyahu to the Lebanese people. How did that go down?
Listen, regardless of what the Lebanese feel towards Hezbollah today, make no mistake, all the Lebanese realize that Israel is an enemy. And what we watched on the screen with Netanyahu's statement is actually Israel sowing more hatred and more extremism, the very same extremism that it claims to want to eradicate. These statements have really awakened deep fears among the Lebanese of further Israeli aggression, of a full Israeli invasion. The Lebanese have not forgotten what happened in 2006 and what happened before the year 2000. So no, the statement was outrageous, we believe. I don't really understand what was the purpose behind Prime Minister Netanyahu's statement. That was definitely outrageous, and the Lebanese felt outraged by it.
Has public opinion and public sentiment towards Hezbollah changed at all, would you say, in the last couple of weeks? And I'm just wondering, whether there are pockets of Lebanese society where people are secretly pleased that Hassan Nasrallah is no longer alive, and they want to see Hezbollah further degraded and weakened. I mean, are you hearing or seeing any evidence to suggest that public opinion is shifting?
I mean, public opinion is obviously shifting. The Lebanese, those of them who had not realized it before, many of the Lebanese today realize that Hezbollah has actually been dragging us towards mass suicide. This is a war that Hezbollah dragged the Lebanese into without their will. And at the same time, this is a war that Hezbollah has given to the Israelis. It's a war that the Israelis have wanted for a long while. So Hezbollah has given the Israelis the pretext for this war. And the Lebanese realize this very well. The Lebanese today are, if I want to sum it up in one word, tired. They are tired of ideological projects. They are tired of regional agendas. They are tired of being sold empty victories that are not reflected anywhere in their daily lives. Today, what the Lebanese want is to restore their sense of normal life. They want to restore their livelihoods. They want to be able to live in a normal country again. They are tired of these empty victories. The only victory for the Lebanese today is to find shelter and to restore their lives. And they realize that this is their priority today.
You've been talking about some events in the past, going back to 2006. I just wonder whether, just looking back, you can identify some key mistakes that were made in the past by people in government in Lebanon who managed somehow or other to allow Hezbollah to hold the entire country to ransom. What would you say the moments were when things could have been done differently and Lebanon wouldn't be in the situation it's in today, which is shackled by Hezbollah?
I believe that, first of all, if you want to talk about the past year, I believe that for a big part of the past year, Lebanon had the opportunity of a diplomatic settlement. It was very clear, the international community had repeated it so many times, even the Israelis had mentioned it so many times, that we had the opportunity for the diplomatic settlement. The problem is that the Lebanese government never had the courage to take this stand. It was rather repeating Hezbollah's statements. It was rather echoing Hezbollah's interests rather than taking a firm stand and standing for the interests of the Lebanese. This is one. Now, of course, if you want to go back to before this year, I believe that all of the political actors in this country have failed to build a state that can defend the Lebanese and a state that can actually treat all Lebanese as an equal footing. And this is not only Hezbollah's mistake, it's actually a crime that was committed by the entire Lebanese political class that has preferred to preserve its own narrow interest at the expense of actually building a state.
And for people watching who are wondering, Hassan Nasrallah is dead. His successor, we think, is probably dead as well. A large number of operatives and senior ranking officials within that group are dead or severely injured from the pager attacks of 3 weeks ago. How is Hezbollah still functioning? What do people say about that there in Lebanon?
I mean, it's very clear that, first of all, there's some sort of collegial decision-making that is at the level of whatever remains of the leadership or the tier 2 or tier 3 of the leadership. But more importantly, on the ground, it's very clear that Hezbollah has moved to what it does best, which is sort of a decentralized structure with guerrilla-like warfare. And it's very clear that this has been effective, actually. I mean, to some extent, in south of Lebanon. Hezbollah continues to operate in south of Lebanon and to stand against Israeli aggression. So what we're talking about is more collegial decision-making at the level of leadership and the more decentralized structure, particularly with regards to guerrilla warfare in south of Lebanon.
Just looking forwards, Diana, to the future, we heard that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Biden had a conversation on the telephone last night. They don't seem to have been speaking very much the last few weeks, which is surprising, given that they are staunch allies. Do you think the Lebanese people still regard the United States as being an ally of Lebanon?
I believe that the international community in general, and including the United States, has, as I mentioned earlier, not stood up to its talk with regards to actually upholding international human rights and with regards to stopping Israeli aggression. And I believe that this level of impunity that Israel has reached today is allowing it to commit more and more atrocities that will only backfire in the region. That being said, what I would like to focus on more is what the Lebanese and what the Lebanese political class will do vis-a-vis this war that is unfolding. It's up to us as Lebanese to stand up to our interests, to pronounce what we want, to work today on electing a president of the Republic, because Lebanon has been suffering from a presidential vacuum for the past 2 years now, to actually elect a capable government, because Lebanon's government today is in a caretaker mode, to actually deploy the Lebanese armed forces across all Lebanese territory, and to engage in a real process of political reform and of reconciliation among the Lebanese. There is a lot of work that the Lebanese political class has to do itself. And of course, the international community also has a moral and a political responsibility towards the Lebanese and towards the people of this region to stop this Israeli aggression or to pressure the Israelis even more for them to stop their aggression.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Diana Menhem, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, for more, I'm joined now by the former US ambassador to Lebanon and former US Special Envoy for Peace in the Middle East under President Barack Obama, David Hale. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Joe Biden held their first telephone conversation in more than a month yesterday. Don't you find it slightly extraordinary that they're not speaking more often under the current circumstances?
Yes, and I'm glad that they have put whatever personal differences they've been having aside long enough to have a conversation between these two world leaders at a moment where so much is at stake. I think that's very important. I will say, I mean, I've been around Washington a long time, and I know that Prime Minister Netanyahu has rarely been an American president's favorite counterpart. But the important thing is they're talking again.
They are, but it does seem that President Biden has pretty limited influence or limited ability to influence Netanyahu. I mean, why do you think this is the case?
You know, it's very strange because it's almost a schizophrenia. Because at the military-to-military level, the United States' support for Israel is unshakable and has been instrumental, frankly, in allowing Israel to defend itself so effectively. And yet at the political diplomatic level, the administration has had a very difficult time asserting its own relevance and having the various parties on both sides, Israel and the pro-Iranians, to take our will seriously. And now we're facing the period of the twilight, weeks and months of this administration. So their influence is evaporating rapidly.
And you sort of alluded earlier to some differences, shall we say, between the two men. And there's this new book out by the journalist Bob Woodward entitled War that everyone seems to be talking about. I haven't read it. I don't know if you have. But how likely do you think it is that President Biden used the kind of language he's reported to have used to describe the Israeli Prime Minister?
I haven't read the book either. I've seen excerpts. I obviously am not an insider. I'm retired, but none of that surprises me. I've heard other presidents use even worse language about him. So, there's a high stakes. There's a lot of emotion. These are powerful men with big egos. The important thing is that they bring all that under control and act on the interests of our two states, which have an incredibly meaningful alliance.
Yeah, and as you say, the final months of the Biden administration, and to the outside world, it does look a little bit like he's sort of given up on this particular issue. We're 26 days away, aren't we, from the US presidential election? And I'm just wondering what consequences you see the perceived inaction by the Biden administration as having for Vice President Kamala Harris, who is trying to carry the banner for her party into this election.
Well, one of the reasons I think this administration has had difficulty influencing the situation in the Middle East is that it is conflicted itself on what goals it has because of the election and because of the spectrum of opinion within the Democratic Party base, which goes all the way from the traditional pro-Israeli stance of so many Democrats to all the way to an increasingly vocal, if I can use the word, more progressive outlook, which is more willing to challenge Israel, even to the extent of, frankly, veering into anti-Semitism. And I think the administration has been reluctant to take a strong stand because it doesn't want to alienate any of those groups. And yet, at a moment like this, where it's really a moment of truth in the Middle East, it's very hard not to take a stand. And so what they've been offering, with that political backdrop, what they've been offering is just not relevant to the moment when, no one in the region wants a ceasefire, only the outsiders, the Americans, the Europeans, the Arabs. We've not really offered a credible alternative to reestablish security and stability in the Middle East through diplomacy. So the Israelis take matters into their own hands. And this is what we're seeing.
And if we're talking about Kamala Harris, let's mention her opponent in this race, Donald Trump. I mean, do you think he's going to be able to bring something to the table in terms of engaging with Prime Minister Netanyahu? How do you see the state of relations between those two men?
Well, they accomplished things together that were unprecedented in terms of the relocation of our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem in recognition of reality, and the Abraham Accords. So I think there's a track record there that shows we can get results together. I honestly believe, I was in the administration. I was the #3 individual at the State Department for most of the Trump years. And I suspect that they'll return, if they're elected, to a maximum pressure strategy on Iran. Unlike the current administration, which is reluctant to acknowledge Iran's central role as the source of violence and chaos in the Middle East, the Trump people have no hesitation to do so. So I think you'll see piling on sanctions, weapons interdiction, diplomatic strategies to isolate Iran, and military pressure as well. And I think that, frankly, may be what's required if they're persistent in applying that pressure.
And just with regards to Iran, we anticipate that Israel will be striking Iran in retaliation for that barrage of missiles fired at Israel 9 days ago. Just wondering what your thoughts are as to what might happen and what Washington's red lines are at this stage.
Well, I think that the Israelis have been wise not to sort of rush into a tit-for-tat exchange directly with Iran. To be honest, I think I'm a hardliner on Iran, but I'm not sure it's even necessary. I think the Israelis have accomplished a demonstration that they control the escalatory ladder and that they are regaining some degree of domination over the Iranian proxies, which is the first order of business and not completed. So I think, if they find a military target and they can take a clean shot, I don't know who would really argue against that other than the Iranians themselves. But I'm not sure it really changes the equation right now. I think they just need to keep the pressure on the proxies, and that will over time change Iranian behavior because they are growing weaker and weaker. And as we tighten the noose together.
Okay, let's talk a bit about Lebanon. After all, you were ambassador there during the years 2013 to 2015. Do you feel that there's there was a sense of inevitability about where we are now? From what you saw there, did you see the country, descending into the level of chaos that it's currently in?
I am often a pessimist. I never imagined when I left in 2015 that things could get so much worse as they have. And just when you think it can't get worse, it does get worse. They've been enduring a political paralysis, domination by Hezbollah, who has arms that no one else in the country has. They have been enduring an economic and financial meltdown that was triggered largely by the corruption and mismanagement of key individuals in Lebanon. The quality of life for the middle class, which was robust in Lebanon, has been decimated. And the government is incapable of finding a path out of this. They are unable to elect a president, and therefore they don't have a prime minister who's fully confirmed or a cabinet. It just gets worse and worse. And now we have, yet again, the movie that we've all seen before of what's happening in the South. So it is time for the United States and others to think about how, once Israel has reestablished and achieved its goals on its northern border, what are we going to do about Lebanon? And one of the historical patterns that unfortunately has not served U.S. interests is that we often just walk away once the immediate problem of a ceasefire has been achieved. And we don't really invest in the longer-term solutions that are needed to prevent these things from happening in the future.
And I'm just wondering whether you, as ambassador to Lebanon, had any encounters or any dealings with Hezbollah, or what was the policy at the time? Was it to sort of totally ignore them and not to try to engage, or were there ever any attempts to try to engage with them and maybe somehow improve the situation even back then?
No, the United States has had a very strict policy right from the start when Hezbollah was formed and blew up 2 of our embassies and Marine barracks and took a number of Americans hostage, including U.S. officials, and killed them, that we don't deal with this kind of party and terrorist organization, and I hope we never will. And we wouldn't be able to influence them by having a tea party with them. The only influence comes about through pressure and building alliances from those also who feel threatened. And Hezbollah, by the way, has eliminated so much of the opposition that would normally be emerging now in this vacuum through assassination.
Yeah, I mean, Hezbollah has been dealt blow after blow in the last couple of weeks. And it does seem that Israel is managing to severely degrade them. I'd just like to ask your reaction to what's happened the last couple of weeks. I mean, I think everyone was taken by surprise, and I'm just wondering how much further you think Israel wants to go in terms of their will to degrade Hezbollah, or have they gone far enough?
Well, it's astounding what they've accomplished. I never imagined they had this capability. And Hezbollah obviously is never going to be quite the same. But while Nasrallah is dead, Hezbollah is not. They do have, ranks and ranks of fighters. They still have an enormous amount of very high tech and medium and low tech, by the way, technology and weapons to deploy, as we've seen. And I think that if the Israeli objective is as they state, which is a relatively finite objective compared to Gaza and Hamas, they will be focused on their southern border. There are indications, though, of mission creep. The evacuation zone has kept growing from about 15% of Lebanon to now 25% of Lebanon. There's a maritime operation underway. So I hope that their successes are not leading to overreach and hubris. But they definitely want to degrade Hezbollah significantly in the short run. And then together, we all have a longer term objective, which is how do we make sure that Iran never again can dominate and control the situation throughout the Middle East through these proxies, not just Hezbollah, but the others that we have seen.
We've heard the Israeli Prime Minister giving these addresses to the people of Iran, and this week the people of Lebanon. He said in a video message, it's time that you took back your country from Hezbollah. I mean, what do you think he's trying to achieve here? Because, I mean, it's very difficult to imagine how the Lebanese people are supposed to do what he's asking them to do.
Right. I mean, the Lebanese are deeply divided in many ways, including a fault line between pro-Iranian and Western-oriented elements. But the Western-oriented elements have been largely intimidated, if not killed, by Hezbollah. So expecting them to come out suddenly and rise up in opposition is to expect suicide. So I don't think that itself is going to happen. I can understand the Israeli leaders trying to demonstrate that their ultimate goals are to reestablish stability that will be beneficial to Lebanese and Israeli innocent victims alike. But I think these kinds of messages are unlikely to really be effective. I think it has to be coming from authentic voices in these societies that are asking for this, and it's going to take time, and timing is crucial in diplomacy and statecraft.
Do you see Lebanon heading in the same direction as Gaza?
No, I don't. I hope not. We've certainly seen in the past that, unlike in Gaza so far anyway, if there is Israeli overreach in Lebanon, there will be a counter-reaction. And it's not gone well in the past for Israel. So again, I hope they've learned the lessons. There's no reason that they have not. When they talk about limited in duration and physical and geographical extent, that really is true, and that they plan to go in and out to use this incredibly effective new strategies that they've developed, that they use them well to reestablish security as every state's entitled to, but not to try to dominate Lebanon in turn.
I just want to ask you what the chances are, in your opinion, of a broader war in the Middle East, and one into which the United States is drawn in.
You know, I get the question a lot, and I'm always a little bit, with all due respect, a little bit puzzled by it, because, of course, we have a very broad war that's gone on for a year, which is longer than we've seen since the 80s in the region. And, yeah, it could get worse. I mean, you could certainly see a scenario where there's a war in the Persian Arabian Gulf and threatens oil facilities on both sides. You could see, you know, there's a question mark over Syria, and the Russians are there. But I frankly, I don't believe that there's any real interest in going down those roads. I think that we and our Israeli friends and others who feel threatened by Iran need to focus on the very specific steps that can continue to weaken them. And the weaker they are, the less likely they are to do things that, frankly, are not very effective, such as we've seen with these two, April and now, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, the barrages against Israel just aren't effective. And so I also think we should not scare ourselves into thinking that that Iran is almighty. They have been able to dominate the scene for a long time because no one was countering them. And now that it's happening, we see that actually they're on the defensive.
Yeah, they've been infiltrated, haven't they, in a way that perhaps no one had imagined. There are all sorts of reports about the level of infiltration, and I'm assuming, and you know, I get the impression from talking to analysts about Iran that people there are extremely paranoid in the corridors of power. Is that something you're hearing as well?
Sure. I mean, I don't hear a lot from Iran myself, but I can only imagine that would be the case. And that is what's frankly needed to make them change their motivation. Look, they'd be happy to fight Israel to every last Arab, every last Lebanese, every last Palestinian. And that equation has to change. They have to feel that there's a price that they're going to pay for this continued behavior. And once they feel that that cost is real and meaningful, then they might start to change their behavior. And that's when we can throttle back the power equation and begin to offer ideas on how to bring about a more stable, durable Middle East peace.
Okay, well, we're out of time. I really want to say a big thank you to you for taking the time to speak to us. David Hale, former US ambassador to Lebanon, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
My next guest served as the National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during the years 2011 to 2013. He's also a researcher at JINSA, which is the Jewish Institute for National Security of America. He is retired Israeli Major General Yaakov Admiral. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Al Arabiya News. General Admiral, 2 weeks ago, you told the Israeli television channel 14 that Israel is, quote, very far from defeating or stripping Hezbollah of its capabilities. 16 days since you made those comments. I'd just like to ask you how you see things have evolved.
We still have a very long way to go. In Israel, it was kind of euphoria, you know, after the success of the Beeper surprise, as the Arab called this, Eid al-Beeper. The success to eliminate the leadership of Hezbollah, and so on and so forth. So in Israel, it was kind of euphoria, and for me, it was very important to emphasize, knowing Hezbollah for last 40 years, that it is not the end. It is a strong organization which will find the way how to continue the war, which was initiated by this organization in the 8th of October last year, to continue the war in spite the fact that they got a huge blow. I mean, we killed the whole leadership of the organization. We succeeded to destroy many of its long and medium range missiles, and to kill many of the commanders on the ground, and more so in the last weekend, in a very successful operation in which we destroy all the command points of the Hezbollah in the south. So no question that we have huge success in the first 3 weeks, 4 weeks of the war against Hezbollah. But still, it's very important to remember, Hezbollah is a strong organization, and they are continuing to fight. They will continue to launch rockets and missiles and into Israel, not just in the north, but also to the center of Israel. That was very important for me 16 days ago, to put the balance in another place, to show the people, the Israeli people, that were very happy with the situation in Lebanon. Guys, we have a long way to go.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as you say, Hezbollah is still managing to function in the absence of its leader's replacement. That organization continues to fire rockets at your country. I'm just wondering, you know, where you see things heading to from here, and what the options are, you know, for Israel. Do you walk away, having seriously degraded Hezbollah, you know, perhaps as was done in 2006, or do you carry on despite the fact that serious damage is being inflicted on innocent Lebanese civilians?
Look, I think that the degradation of Hezbollah this time is much, much bigger than it was in 2006. But the lesson that we have from 2006, that if we allow Hezbollah to stay in South Lebanon and to continue to be connected to Syria and Iran. We will find stronger Hezbollah a few years from now. So the biggest mistake of 2006 should not be done again by Israel, meaning to stop too early and to let, after the war, Hezbollah to strengthen and to build capabilities and to be strong in the south in a way that it is endangering our population in North Israel. We have to build another situation. In a way, what we need is to implement 1701, the decision of the United Nations after the operation of 2006, which never had been implemented. But this time, we will enforce it. The IDF will enforce it, not UNIFIL, because UNIFIL is a bad joke. They didn't succeed even to write one report about the Hezbollah, not mentioning the fact that they had the task, supposedly, to prevent Hezbollah from building itself in the south. Even not one report was published by UNIFIL. So if you want to understand what Israel wants to achieve, go to the decision of the United Nations. If you want to understand what Israel is doing, we are degrading Hezbollah, and we will continue to do it for a long time, to the level in which Israel will not be deterred anymore by Hezbollah, and Israel will have the ability in the future to stop any attempt by Hezbollah, the Iranians and the Syrians, to rebuild Hezbollah in Lebanon. And in the south part of Lebanon, our interest is different. What we want is a buffer zone in which there is no Hezbollah at all, not facilities, not infrastructure, not terrorists, not units of Hezbollah, nothing. Hezbollah will not live anymore, will not be there, will not be allocated. No Hezbollah in South Lebanon. From the Litani south, it will be a buffer zone in which Hezbollah does not exist. Only then our citizens will be ready to go back to their homes, because they understand that if that is not the situation on the ground, they might find the threat coming again, not next year, 2 years from now. That is something that we will not allow to happen.
With regards to Iran, I think I'm correct in saying that you advocate a stronger response from Israel to that Iranian barrage of missiles fired at your country 9 days ago than what we saw 6 months ago when there was a similar situation. What would you advise by way of a response on the part of your government?
I don't think that I have enough information to say what sector should we attack. Will it be the oil industry, the nuclear facilities, the industry of the military industry of Iran, or regime symbols, or whatever? I don't feel that I have enough information to say which sector should be attacked. What I think is very important to take into account in the decision, that one, some of the targets should be very close to Tehran, that it will be seen from Tehran. And second, that it doesn't matter which sector, it doesn't matter what is the target should be totally destroyed. It is the first time that Israel is hitting kinetically Iran. And in this situation, it should be very clear to the Iranians that if we reach a place and we attack it, the strike will be accurate and devastating. Meaning, at the end of the strike, the Iranians will go to this place. They will not find anything. Everything will be destroyed. From my point of view, it's more important than which sector will be picked by the decision makers. The ability of Israel to show that we know how to totally destroy targets in Iran.
But some might wonder why, Israel keeps going after the proxies. You keep going after the Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, and not focus more on the organization, the country that funds all of those proxies, which is, of course, Iran. Do you think it's a mistake not to focus more on Iran than perhaps Israel has done up until this point? After all, the last strike was in April, and it didn't inflict particularly lasting damage on the country.
First, you have to remember, the Iran is 1,500 kilometers from it. It's easy to speak. It's not as easy to implement. It's 1,500 kilometers from here. But it is a long argument in Israel. The question that you asked was asked many times by many decision makers and people from the circle in which decisions have been taken. My answer to those who ask the question that Iran without the proxies is much weaker Iran. Think about the situation in which Hezbollah is still strong, Hamas is still strong, and we are attacking Iran. Immediately we will see missiles coming from both Gaza and Lebanon, and we had to face something totally different. Today, when Hamas is out of the equation, is not relevant as a threat to Israel. It's relevant to the people of Gaza, to the soldiers of the IDF who are still cleaning Gaza, but not relevant as a threat to Israel. Now I ask the question, what will be the reaction of Hamas on Gaza for the annihilation of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran? Because Hamas is not relevant as a threat to Israel. And Hezbollah, after what we did to Hezbollah, is much less relevant. It's still relevant. It's what I said 16 days ago. Hezbollah is a strong organization, but much less relevant. And now when we are considering attack in Iran, we don't have to take into consideration the question or the problem of what we will face from Gaza and from Lebanon. What they have is much less than what they had before in their arsenal. So I think that the way to do it one by one, to degrade Hamas or to finish Hamas, to degrade Hezbollah, and then to apply all our resources into Iran, it's the right way to do it. This is the strategy that we had to adopt as a very little country. We are not a big country, remember. All the burden is in
Sure.
We are less than 10 million people, out of them 7 are Jews. So the burden at the end is on 7 million people. And we have to deal with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with Iran, with the Houthis. So I said that I think that the decision to do it one by one and not in parallel to many fronts was the right decision.
You know Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu very well, don't you? You worked with him over the years. We've had quite a few people on this program in the last couple of days and weeks who've said he doesn't actually have a strategy. He's putting his political survival ahead of Israeli national interest. I'd like to ask what you make of comments like those.
I think it's, how to say it politely, it's a British media. I think there is no any connection between this description and the facts on the ground. Netanyahu was the prime minister which made the most important decision at the beginning of the war. First, we are focusing and we are going to eliminate Hezbollah. Hamas in Gaza. The second anchor of the strategy was 4 days later when he decided not to accept the offer of the security apparatus to begin a war in Lebanon, to attack in Lebanon. It was very tempting target, but he decided, no, we are focusing on one front. The third decision was part of this strategy that when we finish in Gaza, we are going to fight Hezbollah. He didn't have a clear plan. And what happened is an event of use it or lose it with the peoples. But it was clear, the three elements of his strategy are very clear. Elimination of Hamas, totally elimination of Hamas, never was a target for the IDF since the establishment of the State of Israel. The second one was not two fronts in parallel. And the third was, after Hamas, we will take care for Hezbollah because we have to bring our citizens back home in the north part of Israel. If someone don't see the frame of this strategy, I'm really sorry, he doesn't understand what strategy means.
But you're saying start the Hezbollah operation once Hamas has been degraded. But Hamas hasn't been completely degraded. In fact, we're hearing that Hamas is regrouping in some parts of northern Gaza. So that strategy,
yes, but
is he really adhering to it?
Yes, but I think it's very minimal. I mean, as I said, no one asked the question, what will be the reaction of Hamas for the elimination of Haniya, the head of Hamas? What will be the reaction of Hamas to the elimination of Nasrallah? What is the contribution of Hamas to the war when Israel is very aggressive in Lebanon? Theoretically, they had to be more involved because to help Hezbollah, which decided to launch a war in the 8th of October to help Gaza. Where is Hamas now? Hamas is not relevant anymore as a threat to Israel. They can launch some rockets from time to time. But slowly, slowly, they will be annihilated, all of them. Why? They lost the ability to act as an organization. The organization system does not exist. They don't have the ability to manufacture in Gaza. They don't have the ability to smuggle to Gaza. They don't have the ability to move forces from one place to another. They don't have the ability to collect intelligence and to use it against us. Of course, it's as a guerrilla. When we are coming in the places in which they are under the ground somewhere, they try to kill our soldiers. But thank God, the numbers are 1 in every 2 weeks.
And yet, 27 people were killed in Gaza just today in Deir al-Balah at a school which was housing displaced people. That happened today, we understand. Israeli strike on a school in Deir al-Balah. So if there's no Hamas, why are attacks like that happening and killing 27 civilians?
No, because as you said, you told me, you asked me, Hamas is trying to regroup. When we identify an area, a place, a building, a school, a mosque in which they try to build the new seeds of the next Hamas, what you call regrouped, we are going there and kill them. We don't hesitate. There are still thousands, I don't know, 20, 30,000 members of Hamas still exist in Gaza. Whenever they will try to regroup, either it will be in school or in open space or in a building somewhere in Khan Yunis or Rafah or Gaza, and we will have the intelligence, we will bomb them, we will send ground forces to kill them. We are not hesitating. We have a year to clean Gaza. We know the situation. We didn't kill all of them yet, and we have a long way to go. But it is totally different organization. If the threat of Hamas was at the beginning of the war 100, today it's 20 or 10. But still, we have to continue and to be very determined and to insist that we have a job to do in Gaza. It's to eliminate all the terrorists of Hamas, all of them. They had been around 40, 45,000 people. We killed between 15 to 20. We have to kill the others. And if new will be recruited, we will kill the new as well. Hamas will not exist in Gaza in the future. It's not like Hezbollah that will remain in Lebanon, and we will have the job to keep it very low in its capabilities. Hamas will not exist.
How long are we talking? How long are we talking, General? Because this is my last question. We're nearly out of time. But how long? What sort of time frame?
I answer immediately. In the West Bank, in 2002, it took us 4 years to clean the area. We begin with 122 Israelis killed in 1 month by terrorists coming from the West Bank. It means 1,500 a year, 122 in 1 month in April 2002. In the spring of 2002, just not April, spring of 2002. And after 4 years, we succeeded to have averagely in the next 15 years, 15 people which had been killed. 1% of what we had in 2002. You can say you didn't finish with the terrorism. You had 15 people which had been killed every year. Yes, but if you compare it to what we had before the operation, it's 1%. I think that we should reach this situation in Gaza. We will be people from Hamas which try to kill Jews in the future. This is the character of the organization, to kill Jews.
So, General Amidror, you're saying that we could be a number of years away from a conclusion?
No, what I said, no, let me finish. In Gaza, unlike in the West Bank, it will take a year.
Another year.
It's more concentrated. It's not spread as it was in the West Bank. We are now in a better situation controlling the area. So it will take probably another year. At the end of 2025, Hamas will remain a footnote in the books of the history of the Middle East.
Okay, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us.
You are most welcome.
Yaakov Admiral, thank you very much indeed.
You are most welcome.
Well, for more analysis, I'm joined now by the defence analyst and former colonel in the British Army and former defence attache in Kabul, Colonel Simon Diggins. Thank you very much indeed for speaking to us, Colonel Diggins. No end in sight, is there, to all the fighting in Gaza or Lebanon for that matter? And I'm just wondering, does it look to you as though Israel has started some forever wars that it's not going to be able to get out of anytime soon?
I think that's exactly where they are. I mean, they've had to respond to what they regard as existential threat, but they've chosen to conduct their operation in such a way that they didn't just deal with the initial threat, but they seem to take themselves into a place where, as you say, it's very hard for them to get out of it. They had their own internal security issues in the occupied West Bank. They went into Gaza to deal with Hamas. They've gone to southern Lebanon to deal with Hezbollah. Each of those operations, almost by itself, would absorb a huge amount of manpower and resources, and they don't have that. They are still essentially, well, very professional. They've also got reserve armies. They've then got the wider issues around the conflict with Iran, ongoing issues with the Houthis in the Red Sea, and then there's another one, if you like, another area of conflict, which is the Court of International Human Rights and public opinion. So the Israeli government at the moment has got itself not just caught on the horns of a dilemma, but is fighting, as you say, on many different fronts without necessarily the resources to actually finish one of them properly. And it does now look as though Netanyahu seems happy about this, and that's for his own internal political reasons, but we are heading towards something that looks like a sort of forever war.
Yes, it sounds like you think the Israelis have spread themselves rather thinly in terms of all these different conflicts that they're caught up in. Just looking at some of the specifics, 28 people killed today in an Israeli airstrike on a school sheltering displaced families in central Gaza. That's according to the Palestinian Red Crescent. I mean, one of the topics we've talked a lot to our guests about here on Al Arabiya News is this perceived lack of strategy on the part of Israel. Do you think Israel does have a strategy in Gaza? And if so, what is it?
I think the strategy is one that we find uncomfortable. The strategy is essentially to prevent the Palestinian people from establishing their own state. And I think that's something the West particularly has found difficult to understand. The official line, the official policy that's been in existence since at least 2000, but certainly since 2005, and the withdrawal of Israelis from Gaza, as these are preliminary steps towards establishing a two-state solution. But in all of that period, from 2005 right the way through to 2024, bar 18 months, Bibi Netanyahu has been Israeli prime minister, and he's absolutely opposed, as is his party, Likud, and his right-wing coalition, to anything that looks like a two-state solution. And so, without wishing to overstate the point, I mean, they've done everything possible to ensure that Gaza was split off from the Fatah-controlled West Bank, separate organizations, dealt with them separately, undermined and subverted everything they're trying to do. So yes, he does have a strategy, but the strategy is not necessarily one that the West is comfortable. In other words, it basically goes against what the international consensus is, which is there shall be a two-state solution dealing with Israel and Palestine. And therefore, what you do is you keep stirring the pot. You don't necessarily do it the whole time, but if an opportunity arises, as has arisen as a result of a horrendous attack by Hamas on October the 7th, you use that opportunity to, in Netanyahu's words, to rewrite the Middle East for a generation, to make new. So I think that's where his strategy is. So there's a huge gap between what the West think we're heading toward, which is a ceasefire, followed by some resolutions, followed by a sustainable peace, and actually what Netanyahu and his parties are trying to do, which is really directly opposed to that strategy.
Yes, it sounds like you're saying that the Israelis really want to seize this opportunity, the momentum they've had in recent weeks, these intelligence coups they've had, and that does seem to explain, doesn't it, the reluctance on the part of the Israelis to talk about diplomacy and talk about ceasefires.
No, they see this as once in generation opportunity. I mean, there is a sort of precedent to this, which is linked, I think, to some of them, which is, you know, the precedent arriving before George Bush took power in the US in 2000. He was sponsored by, yes, he was a Republican, but there was this whole grouping called the Project for the New American Century. And they talked about what they call the Pearl Harbor moment. They look for some event which would allow the US to project its power. And after the al-Qaeda attack on 9/11 in the US, you had Donald Rumsfeld being very honest and open about it, saying, let's wrap it all up at once, hence the attack on Iraq, as well as trying to deal with al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And I think this is what we've got here with Netanyahu. I mean, the conspiracy theorists can keep quiet. I mean, I don't think he orchestrated the October the 7th attack at all. I mean, they were clearly taken completely by surprise by what actually happened. But they saw the opportunity. The opportunity it's given them is the opportunity not just to destroy Hamas, but as it has done, to go after Hezbollah. And as he said last week, just after his visit to the UN, to try and deal with Iran as well. That's exactly what Rumsfeld tried to do after 9/11. He said, let's wrap it all up at once, all the issues in the Middle East. And I think that's what Netanyahu is trying to do. So when he talks about remaking the Middle East for generations, this is what he's trying to do. This is the opportunity he sees to try and do something very dramatic and change, if you like, the geopolitical calculus under which Israel sits.
We're going to be coming on to Iran in just a moment, and specifically how Israel responds to Iran's missile attack of 9 days ago. But before that, I just want to talk a little bit more about what's happening in Lebanon, because we understand from UNIFIL, the peacekeeping force, that Israel has been repeatedly hitting UN peacekeepers' positions in the last 24 hours. Two UNIFIL peacekeepers have been injured, we understand. This all sets some pretty dangerous precedents, doesn't it, for future conflicts around the world if Israel's allowed to do this? Why wouldn't other countries in the future take a similar course of action and perhaps
they show little or no respect for I agree entirely with them. They show little or no respect for UNIFIL and the United Nations. We should recognise what UNIFIL can and cannot do. I mean, it is at best a peacekeeping force. It's mandated to keep a peace, but clearly the peace no longer exists. Nonetheless, they do have some protection roles, and they've put themselves close to villages which otherwise would be extremely vulnerable. And that's what the Israelis are accusing them of doing, basically of hiding Hezbollah fighters behind, if like the UN flag. They show complete disrespect for the United Nations in Gaza. A significant number of UN personnel have been killed in Gaza, along with lots of other people as well. So yes, it is disrespectful to what they're doing. And I just think it's so utterly short-sighted, because Israel, at the end of the day, has got to make peace with the world. There's got to be a peace in which Israel has properly a right to exist. I absolutely support that. So, but that needs if you like, as I said, the court of international public opinion to say yes, we want Israel to exist and we support it. And disrespecting the one organisation, which, if you like, is a supranational organisation, the United Nations, is not helpful. And obviously extremely dangerous and worrying for the UN personnel and those who are looking after them as well.
And in terms of the time frame for the conflict in Lebanon, already it's been a year and 3 days in Gaza. I mean, yes, Hamas has been degraded significantly, but they do seem to be regrouping at the moment as well. Lebanon's a much more complicated country to do combat in, isn't it? Because of the terrain, there are mountains, there are borders, there's a sea border, and there is not just Hezbollah, there are other armed groups in Lebanon. And were they to join in with the perception that their country was being harmed by an external force to the extent that it is, I mean, we could be looking at a much larger, much more complicated conflict there in Lebanon than anything we saw in Gaza.
Yeah, and it has that potential. I mean, if you look at some more recent Israeli incursions into the Lebanon, they never ended up where they started off, and they all started off with the same kind of logic of precise, targeted operations. In the 70s and early 80s, they were and through to 2000, they were targeted against the remnants of the PLO. After the Israeli occupation in 1982 to 2000 occupation, Hezbollah arose in the south, and then they made an incursion in 2006 to try and do what they're doing now against Hezbollah, and had to withdraw after a month. But it's not an easy place for them. The terrain, as you say, is completely different. There's a network of villages exists there, and you've got Beirut, which is a major international city with all the people in it as well. And so, the further Israel gets drawn into that, the more complicated it becomes, the more you need resources, because you get into a counterinsurgency phase of operations, and counterinsurgency just eats up troops, because you need people not just to operate against insurgents, but you need to guard roads, you need to guard locations, maintain your supply routes and everything that goes with it. So it becomes very difficult to keep that kind of resource going, particularly for the Israelis at the moment, where they still have not achieved a level of peace or stalemate in Gaza at all. We saw again on the anniversary of this October 7th, Hamas fired missiles again at Tel Aviv. So that issue is not resolved either.
Okay, let's talk now about the Israeli response to Iran. Obviously, we don't know what they're going to do yet, but it has been 9 days. So 9 days since the Iranian attack on Israeli territory. So first of all, what's taking so long? And second of all, when the Israeli defense minister says we're going to carry out a powerful, precise, and above all, surprising attack on Iran, what do you think the options are?
The two options, there's three major options in terms of targeting, but just to answer your general point first, the Israelis want to ensure that they, if you like, the message that Netanyahu publicly stated at the United Nations General Assembly, that we can reach anywhere inside Iran, is understood by the Iranians. And I think it also, they were expecting some response from Iran and the missile attacks that took place after the destruction, basically the decapitation of Hezbollah. The indications are they were probably more effective than the Israelis actually put out. So they will clearly want to ensure that the Iranians get the message in terms of what they're doing. In terms of the targeting, there's two major strands of thought here. The first goes back to this sense that this is the equivalent of the Pearl Harbor moment. In other words, this is the opportunity to remake the Middle East for generations. And Netanyahu identified Iran as an existential threat to them, and therefore the targeting would be aimed at something which is strategic and has a direct effect. And that leads them to thinking about attacks on Iran's nuclear development facilities, or significant attacks onto their wealth generating facilities, which obviously is based around oil and the oil infrastructure. So there is that sort of school of thought. Now, for both of those two target sets for those, Iran has said that would be a red line if they would cross them. And against both of those sets of targets, the US have advised the Israeli, we understand, not to do that, precisely because they don't want to escalate it any further. Which leaves a third set, which is a kind of, if you like, the measured, contained response, which would be equivalent to the sort of attack that Iran carried out on Israel. And Iran basically targeted military and intelligence facilities within Israel themselves. And the thinking might well be, the kind of, if you like, the purely rational thinking would be, they would do something but dramatic and effective, no doubt, against those Iranian sort of facilities. So they'd go for a sort of like an equivalent target set that the Iranians went for, perhaps more successful than the Iranians did, but they'd go for that sort of target set against Iran. But there is just that, and I think that's where the Americans would like them to go, but there is just that thought, there is just that kind of idea in the back of their minds that if you really are in the game of resetting the Middle East for generations, and you've identified Iran, if you like, as a existential threat to Israel, you do something which basically limits Iran's ability to be that existential threat. So that's, I think, why it's taken so long for them to decide what they're going to do. And I think that's where we are now. That's why we're all kind of in kind of watch and wait mode at the moment.
And just lastly, Colonel Diggins, we know that Benjamin Netanyahu and President Biden have spoken now on the telephone in the last couple of hours, in the last 24 hours, I should say. It's the first time they'd spoken in weeks, isn't it? What do you read into the fact that these two leaders just don't seem to be speaking in a situation like the situation we're in right now?
Well, I think at a personal level, they loathe each other. I mean, that's, it's really straightforward. You may have seen some of the reviews of the latest book by Bob Woodward called War, where he's got, he's clearly been given really good access to the White House, and the transcripts of the conversations between President Biden and Netanyahu, they're fairly blue. They're not, this is not polite. But I think it shows up much more, if you like, more generally, more substantively, what's missing from this war, which is the US has got limited or no ability at the moment to control what Israel does. We looked back at history, and I've been doing some research into history as to how some Middle East wars finished in the past. And while, for example, the United States always supported Israel in its conflicts, its various conflicts over the years, it also acted as a restraining influence on them and prevented them from, if you like, so altering the balance of power in the Middle East that other countries would collapse. At the moment, there's no sign whatsoever that the US is doing that. Now, I think that's not a question of willpower. I think they very much like to control what Israel does. But Netanyahu is not listening. For whatever reason, whatever levers of power the US might hold over Israel, they either can't be used or are not being used. And that's why we've got this very dangerous situation that we are having here. It's very hard to see what will control them, except perhaps war exhaustion on the behalf of Israel.
All right, I'm sorry to cut you short. I'm being told we're out of time. I really appreciate you, though, taking the time to speak to us. Colonel Simon Diggins, sorry to cut you off. Thank you very much indeed.
No problem at all. Good to talk to you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.